still start the second session at 7 o'clock. And that is on parental guidance, not parent gone. So again, both sessions will be recorded. So without further ado, I would like to properly introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Luke Lamprecht, whose CV is very long. So to summarize, I know it's your favorite. So Luke has around 3 decades of experience working in the nonprofit and child protection sectors. And he works with children in conflict with the law, children with autism, children with behavioral challenges and psychiatric diagnoses, and children in mainstream schooling. He is an expert consultant on child protection and development, sexual abuse, and toxic masculinity. Luke is fantastic, and he has in-depth understanding and special interest in the child and teenage brain, and is currently completing his MSc in neurodevelopment at FITS within the Department of Pediatrics and Pathology. So Luke is also a very regular face and voice in the media and our school, and we are so blessed to have him here tonight. And most importantly, he is a husband and a loving father of 2 daughters. So please may you all join me in welcoming our thought leader on child protection and development.
And soon to be grandfather as well. So when I wrote the poem and said, when I'm old, I shall wear purple, I said, when I'm old, I shall wear whatever I want. All right, good evening, folks. Thanks very much for joining us, and to everyone online as well. So I've structured the talk today as a bit of a way of thinking about young people, because we've had some really complicated child development issues come out. And I think what I'm trying to kind of look at is how we balance children's development in light of the complexity of the modern world. Right. So I can't ask the people online, so I'll ask the people in the audience. How many of you have got preschool children, primary school children, high school children, adult children? Bit of both. Okay. So how many of you have woken up with a stranger in your house recently?
Are you talking about children or husbands as well?
Any such thing. Children, husbands, whoever it may be. And there's a very important thing around the fact that we develop with our children. Our children are doing very specific things developmentally. And sort of for the first time in the history of the universe, when teenagers say to us they know more than us about something, they're actually right, because they know more about the world in which they are native to than what we do. And that's created some interesting challenges. So it's going to be a combination of those things. So I've called the talk Parenting a Cell Phone, because the funny thing is probably the biggest conflicts I get with adults and children is the regulation of screen time. Okay, so parents seem to be getting on quite well with their children, the children getting on quite well with them. But whenever they come and see me, there's the sense of, I mean, I had a boy come see me the other day that parents have taken his phone away, hasn't been behaving, he's been not doing well in his exams, he's not doing extramurals, so he's becoming more and more involved in his machine, so they took it away. So he looks at them in the session, says, you know that phone helps calm me down, and it's because you've taken my phone away from me that my behavior is so poor. I said to Benzan, so well, let me manage this, So there's this constant push and pull of what the cell phone is doing, what we are doing. And there's been 3 things I want to land before I start. The first is when I ask young people if they think, how many of them, they spend too much time online, what percentage do you think say yes? They think 95. When I ask young people how many of them think their parents spend too much time online, how many percent do you think answer yes? 99. Okay. And then if I ask them, would you be happy one day if you were an adult and your children spent as much time online as you? The answer is no. So there's something where they know something's wrong. They've got a sense that something's wrong. They just don't know what it is, and they just don't know how to manage it. So essentially what we are doing is we are parenting a completely different kind of animal in the world, and it's our children's life online. And it's a first. So it's sort of like literally you know, kind of parallel universe, and for people as old as me, like something out of the Twilight Zone. Okay. All right, next slide. So, oh, sorry. Okay. Just bring it. There. Okay, fortunately, I know what the next slide is.
Wait,
So,
on the screen, at the bottom, there's dots of picture. Yeah, it's all white.
go. All right, so basically what the quote that is going to follow says is that if children can keep alive their sense of, that's me, so you can go on, not being introduced. So if a child is going to keep alive their inborn sense of wonder, you know, of the world, without any such gift from the fairies, they're going to need at least one adult to witness it and accompany them on that journey. And that's you as parents. And the older they get, that is despite their protests, okay? Because children protest about our involvement in their life regularly, okay? And you must remember in all of it, which I'll do in the second talk in more detail, we're not running a popularity contest. You know, you're not your children's friends. Because if you're your child's friends, there's no adult in the room, okay? You know, when they get older and have their own children, we can become friends with our children, but not when they're young. And the biggest thing is that the role of parent is the one thing we can't sub out. So, you know, when you kind of became a parent, you didn't join the EFC where you can tap out at some point. Okay. So it's a very complex job, and it's probably the only job in the world that only you can do. I mean, I'm sure people in the audience can be CEOs of the universe, and anybody can do that job. Maybe not with as much success or passion, but only you can do your own child. You cannot outsource this job. Okay. Right, next slide. So the thing that is concerning me at the moment is that we are not clearly thinking about and understanding the neuroscience of the brains of specifically teenagers. So I'm just going to take you through three very simple developmental things and illustrate why they are important. So when your babies are very small, okay, what happens is when they're born, well, first, if you plan your children, what do you do? What do you do? Okay, I don't want to know what you do to actually conceive the child. That's not the question. What do you do when you're planning your child? What do you think about? Money, space, your relationship. Is it the right time in your life? Do you have time in your job to make time to be a parent? You create space in your mind for the child, okay? Then they're in your body and then they're in the world. And we know that little babies' brains are very fragile because when we lift them, we pick them up, we hold them, we talk to them, we make sure that we feed them properly and look after them, etc. We know that phase of brain development is very critical. It's a phase we call neural pruning. So essentially what happens is the brain prunes itself to adapt to its environment. Okay. Then from about 5, most of the brain is developed, and then we go through latency age, which is sort of the age between 5 and just before puberty. And then we get to puberty when the children's brains literally catch on fire. Okay, so what happens is you get another pruning where they're getting ready to become adults. So they're losing parts of their brain they don't need, and it's sort of streamlining itself for adulthood. And what it's doing at the same time is it's what we call myelinating. So it's getting sort of a conductive protective sheath around the neurons, and that's speeding up the brain. So essentially, as neuroscientists, we say that the teenage brain is the equivalent of giving an unlicensed driver a Ferrari with no brakes. You know, you add to that a device, you've added nitrous to the Ferrari, add to that would be part of the second talk, a bit of nicotine, alcohol, CBD, THC, cannabis, scallions, you know, all the other things they're smoking. And now you've got a turbo with the nitrous, with the unlicensed. So you're liable to have an accident somewhere. But what I want you to understand is that those pathways are being, it's almost like if you think of erosion. So you're walking again and again down the same path. You're walking through the savannah that's never been walked through, and you walk on the grass breaks, then the grass dies, then it becomes sand, then it rains, and it erodes. Now everything that comes in goes down that same path. To change that path by the time you get to 25, which is when the brain says to them, it's actually quite hard. Well, that can be done, and there's neurogenesis and things. The important time to do it is now. And what we're worried about is what what pathways is the machine carving in the brains of our children with the interface with the machine? And it's essentially an experiment because the answer is we don't know the answer. Okay. So that's kind of where we are. So child development in cyber life has become quite complex because I want to sort of illustrate it through a funny story, and it's a thought about prophetic aliens based on neuroscience. So the new frontiers of digital development is, I think, that if we carry on in the way that we have sort of now coming into COVID, coming out of COVID, those aliens that we saw from Roswell and ET are going to be what our children look like in a few generations. So they will have these big dark eyes because they have to see the tiny screen and filter out the blue light. Because of the overstimulation, they're going to have this big head. Because they don't exercise, they're going to have these tiny, scrawny little bodies. They're going to have long fingers to touch the tiny little screens with little knobs on the end of them. Their mouths are going to be small because they don't talk to anyone anymore. They only need little holes in the ears to put the earpods in. They don't need lobes to actually listen. And they will all be one basic color because they never see the sun. So there's a level at which I'm being facetious about it, but I do want you to consider that a cell phone is not a benign thing. So if you think about the effect the machine has on you, it's not benign. Okay, so sometimes it's beneficial and sometimes it's detrimental, but it's not something that just entertains children and does nothing. Okay, in other words, doesn't affect them because it always does in either direction. So we are the first, as I've said, and then the other thing we're battling with at the moment is what we're calling the long COVID of childhood. So we all know about long COVID. If you had COVID, you've got maybe fatigue and heart and lung and brain fog and all of those kind of things. And what we've seen in the long COVID of childhood is that some children, especially those of you who've got pubescent children now, they went into COVID in one body and came out in a completely different body. I mean, the body that they entered and exited is not even the same, okay? They got locked down at a particular phase, they called it lock up, particularly if they were adolescents and teenagers who are naturally moving away from you and sort of socializing with their peers. And what's happened is we also traumatized them. And we must understand that COVID was an adverse childhood experience. It was not normal. We told them this is the new normal. There was nothing normal about COVID, nothing. Not the lockups, not being able to touch each other, not being afraid to go out and breathe and come home and kill your parents. You know, I've got so many children that parents or grandparents have died that are coming for grief because they think that brought COVID home and killed their family. I had one on the way here tonight, okay, literally. So we traumatize them, which means they generally regress because trauma regresses you, okay? And then they became stagnated in terms of their social and emotional development. So they're 10, they came out in the body of 13-year-olds, but they're behaving like 25-year-olds online. When I ask your children, how many of them lie about their age online? How many answer yes? 100%. 100%. Why? Because they want to get access to things they shouldn't have access to. Do you think they read a single permission when they give access to permissions on their apps? None. Access to their mics, their galleries, their cameras, their location, etc., etc. Okay, so it's all become distorted, and then probably the most I've known this for many years. That this Guardian headline, it's the Guardian newspaper in the UK, and the headline was yesterday's headline. I think the fancy headline read something to the effect of tech companies monetize misery. And a young girl had a successful suicide in the UK, and the coroner did post-mortem. And for the first time, the coroner general, whatever they're called in the UK, said that the algorithms on social media directly contributed to her suicide. If it wasn't for the algorithms in the machine, she would not have taken her own life. Okay, which has created this whole kind of, I don't know, the UK called it some kind of review of policy or whatever, where they called the tech companies to this hearing and said, but look at the content these children, you know, this child was having access to. What do the tech companies say? How did it?
Wasn't their fault.
It's not my fault. The parents gave them access in their phones. These kids are downloading it. I can't be censorship, free speech, whatever. Another thing about free speech, which has become an issue, is the fact that apparently free speech is translated into somebody must say something about everything and have an opinion, even if it's completely distorted, which has become another issue, which has created a false narrative online in what we call the post-truth era. Okay, so children are not getting good information online. Asking for information online, for example, like this child around suicide, is like playing Russian roulette. You're either going to end up at SADAG, the depression anxiety support group, or you're going to end up in a suicide cult. I mean, it's that darkness. Okay, next one. Okay, so that's not what we want. Okay, in terms of our children. And the reason that particular alien is pointing at you is that, again, despite children's protest, we have to learn to engage in this world with them. Okay, we do a lot of strange things, like when children do something wrong online or they're looking like they're addicted, we take the device away. Now, you do that with traditional addictions, you know, you kind of limit access to alcohol or marijuana or whatever. You can't do that with technology. It's impossible. So we have to teach young people how to manage and regulate. So how many of your children fight with you about getting off games? Okay, is there argument? Just wait until it's finished. I just want to finish. You know what the trick behind that little sentence is? It has no end. It has no natural end. Okay, so they'll say, oh, but I can't die because my friends are going to be upset because we're playing as a team. Okay, how many of your children are on Discord? One. And if you know what Discord is? The Discord is a very, very heavily unregulated chat site used largely by gamers and is one of the biggest accidental exposures to very terrible things that I see in the context of my work. It's the worst of the worst. Okay. All right, next one. So what are we trying to do with children? So what we're trying to do when we look at teaching them how to be online is really all we want is that they're safe, frankly. Okay. So we don't want anything more than that. So the first thing about online safety and internet safety is that you all remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, you got food and water and shelter and stuff as the first level. Then you got safety, which is very important because if children aren't safe, they can't do anything, frankly. They can't learn, they can't progress. Then you've got belonging, etc., etc. But now apparently Wi-Fi has replaced the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy because people are willing to not even go to the toilet while they're online because they've given up bodily functions like eating and going to the toilet in favor of being online. Okay, so we must recognize that the pull of the machine is very strong. Okay, and even if you think about yourselves, and I'll see people either taking notes about what I'm saying or WhatsApp, this I'm talking so much cack, I wish we'd get on with it and get to the point. Don't know what they're doing on their phones, you know what I mean? But the point is that our phones have become integral to our lives. And if you take children's phones away from them, what is the general response? Negative. So what do? Fight is the main one. And they lie, they hide, etc. They get anxious. So I said to one of my parents, I said to him, listen, just for the drive home, so just put him in the car because at the gym that I run, the boxing gym, cell phones are banned, but you know, it's high intensity exercise. So they don't think about their phones. So anyway, the phones are banned. So they do 3 hours with me and then they go home. So the drive is from Hillbrow to about here. Okay. So I say, just don't give him his phone, just on the drive home, get him to talk to you, you know, play music, do something. And I said, watch him. He's going to become like a Lincoln Park song, crawling in your skin, you know. And it literally, they said it happened. They took the phone, he didn't know what to do with himself, turning upside down, legs on the ceiling, like writhing, like someone's torturing him, okay? Because they cannot regulate without the machine. And we've got to be very careful of that because we cannot use machines as pacifiers because they're not benign. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay, next one. So I've done this one with you, but the most important one I've done well, let me just mention toddlers and then primary school, but the adolescence is the big one I want to deal with, which I'm going to do in a bit of detail now. But we've recently seen that some of the pram companies are now, like I'm shopping now for stuff, but as a grandparent, you know, we've got to buy Ferrari, pushy cars and whatever, you know. So, you know, exactly, the ones I can run with and all of that kind of thing. And they've got docking stations for iPads instead of mobiles. Okay. Now, the problem with something like that is, you know, it doesn't seem like it's a challenge. Okay, but you must think about something very simple. If you have a child looking up and they were looking at a mobile, they're doing a couple of really important things. First thing they're doing is they're reaching. They've got to reach for something in three-dimensional space, so spatial perceptual skills. They've got to be able to grab it. Each of those things has a different texture. So they are learning to not be tactile defensive. They're exploring different textures. They're grabbing, they're pulling, they're manipulating. These things move in space. They're also learning grip. They're learning radial ulnar separation, which is the beginning of doing this, which is the beginning of eating, which is the beginning of handwriting. Okay, just from a simple thing like a mobile. And the problem with the screens is that there's too much sound and picture and too little else. Okay, so that's the one thing. You've got to balance these things. You can't let Barney, which I don't think Barney is, or Teletubbies, whatever the hell they are now. You know, you can't let any of those people babysit your children on the 2D screen. Ad infinitum, because it's not okay. Then same with toddlers. And the big thing with toddlers, and the interesting thing the research is finding is like with most things with toddlers, if you are not there to digest what they're doing and seeing with them, it's not as helpful as it would be. Okay, so you've got to do it with them. You can't just sit them in front of it and say, thank goodness they're quiet. Okay. In fact, when children of that age are quiet, I'd run to the general area where they are because something is desperately wrong. Okay. Then primary school and screen time, we started introducing, you know, sort of the American Psychiatric Association. We're trying to come up with guidelines, and they kind of say start introducing at about 10 before they hit puberty. 2 hours is tops, and that's 2 hours of screens in total. No? And that's obviously not education. Studying on your screen, it's different, but it's recreational. Okay, and then adolescence is a completely different animal. So how many of you have got teenagers in your house currently? How many of you have woken up with a stranger in your house? Okay, good. Now, the two things that teenagers are doing is they're developing their identity and they're developing a sense of belonging. Okay, and their identity is everything that stands against you, and the belonging is anywhere but with you.
Yes.
Okay, comes to a point where you're made of acid. So when you hug them, it's like you're burning them. Okay? You got to walk like 6 blocks from them at any particular kind of. And what happens is that there's two things happening. They're getting ready to leave home and you're getting ready to tell them to go. So it's a very natural kind of progression and it's all normal. The problem we're having is children are disappearing into a machine where we can't help them as the mother birds digest the worm of the world that is so complex because we don't know what they digest. So what I say to parents in very simplistic terms is that, going back to the previous slide, which is the lifelong needs, you always have to see your children as having lifelong needs, basic needs which you meet, needs for safety, needs to belong, self-esteem, self-actualization, etc. And on this level, we've got life stage needs. So like an adolescence is developing their identity. So it might be online, otherwise, like, if I'm not online, I can't belong anywhere. If I go to school, everyone will say, like, oh, where are you? It's like you don't exist if you don't have a social media profile kind of thing. You know, so it's like you become a ghost in your own world. And what's happening in that context is that we are worried about a thing called splitting. So what splitting is largely, it's a very fancy psychological concept, which is the ability to hold good and bad in tandem. So to say, I have bad feelings, but I can manage them. I have good feelings. My dad is both bad and good. My mom is both bad and good. And I can hold those things in tension. So what they do is they create multiple different identities and experiment with those identities in the world. So like when I was young, I experimented with identities. I grew up in the south of Joburg. Even in those years, I wore what are called brave pants. And if you grew up in the south in the 80s and you wore pants like this, you were very brave. So, you know, And but what I did is I tried on different identities based on music, who I hung out with, based on what I wore, you know, whether I was a mod or a goth or a neuro or whatever at the time. And there was a sense where, you know, I had a limited set of options to work with. At the moment, the options are endless. Okay, so you can try on endless options online. And what's happening is that online doesn't teach you grit, because the problem you have is you can be anything online and fit in anywhere. So you put something online, someone doesn't like it, you take it down. Or someone does respond, you take it down. Someone likes it, you do more of it. You put something online, someone does, you block them. Okay, follow, like, cancel that person, follow, like. So what happens is the world just feeds you back to yourself ad infinitum. Okay, which is an easy place to live. Plus, which is the part that makes me sad, I actually understand why children don't want to be in the world I've handed them. Just stand around and listen to people of my age talk around a chop and a door. I'm like, I also don't want to be here. You know what I mean? Oh, the country's cock, and look at what they're doing to the government, and like the lights are out, and you know, they're slowly boiling the frog, and polar ice caps are melting, and we're all going to drown, and those who don't drown are going to catch fire, and you know, it's like apocalyptic, you know. And it's difficult to digest. And what the social media world does is just feeds that. Okay, but what it does is it feeds a lens of it. And it's the lens you should be afraid of, because that's what causes the splitting, the inability to hold all of these complex things in balance. Okay, that all makes sense. Okay, next one. All right, so what are we doing now? Okay, so what we are proposing is the following. We're not proposing that we don't let children be online. I mean, that's ridiculous. We're proposing that we treat being online as we do the rest of being in the world. So COVID actually taught us a lot of very important things. So the first thing that COVID taught us was that being online and connected to people virtually for most of us is not enough. Okay, that's what it taught us. Even teenagers, ask them, how many of you would prefer to be back in lockdown at home? About 10% put their hands up. Now that 10% are very introverts, so and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being an introvert, okay? Or the other thing I'm seeing said is children couldn't re-enter the world because they've become absorbed in the online world and they've developed some quite serious mental health problems. So those are the two cases. The rest of them understand, but why do you want to be back at school? Not because of the teachers. They will tell me very loudly. I said, I get it. So why do you want to? Because I feel connected. I have a sense of friends. There's people around me. I know adult men, I don't want to guess how old you guys are, but I know adult men, they went mental under lockdown because they couldn't get out of the house. Proper cabin fever. They were like making Wilson, you know. So that's the opportunity we must use. And what I said, so my wife's a teacher as well, and what I said to people under lockdown is maintain your routine. If you've got to wake up at a certain time, get your child out of bed at that time. Okay. Make sure whatever their routine would be when they have to go back to school, you maintain that routine. If that's the time to do something, brush your teeth, you know, eat, get dressed, go to school, whatever, keep that routine in place. When it's break time, go outside, have something to eat, stand in the sun, you know, be like you are in the world. Because when we told them there's the new normal, we literally left them to their own devices. And not in that, we always say, don't leave children to their own devices, and that's what we did. And they got lost in the machine. Okay, and they lost. Okay, a lot of our children were just lost in the machine. So anyway, we want to reestablish the routine. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing is when you give your children a phone, the phone is given to them not as a gift, it's given to them as a tool on a contract. So that's the very first thing. Apples are much harder to secure than Androids just because of Apple's security platforms. I mean, you saw with Oscar Pistorius' trial, the FBI couldn't even break into his phone. You know, so Apple is very hectic around security, so they're harder to secure and get access to. So there's lots of products out there, but the most important thing you want to understand about the product is the metaphor of the product. And the metaphor is that your home, you secure. And us in Joburg, because I live in Joburg, I know we secure our homes. So we've got electric fans, beam, bar, roving paintball gun with motion detector, actual gun, dogs, armed security, etc., booms, etc. Now, why do we do that? We do that because we're worried about who comes into our home. Every single screen in your home is a window and a door into your child's brain. Every single window, every single device. Okay. So the idea, that's in the next screen where I'll conclude. Anyway, so this is the stuff around bullying anyway, which I've been asked to talk about as well. But the important thing to understand is that, I mean, I did a talk at a very religious school down the road here. And the rabbi had a brilliant, I wish I could find it actually, a brilliant clip from the Jewish community where there's a mother, a from Jewish woman standing at the door. You knock, knock, knock on the door. She opens the door. There's a group of Rastafarians standing at the door. They walk through and they go upstairs. Knock, 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 group of punks come in, walk upstairs. Knock, 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 group of skinheads, which is even very dodgy, go upstairs. Eventually she stops one of them. I think when the gods got there, she stopped them and said, "Where are you going?" "No, we're going to your daughter's room upstairs." "You can't go there." And you go upstairs, and that's exactly what the daughter's searching for in terms of identity and belonging. And every time she's opening one of those, that's what she's seeing, as if they're coming into her room and talking to her. So that's the metaphor. Okay. So the metaphor is that we need to secure our homes, and our homes contain devices. Right. So we're not being, and your child, which like I'll do in the next slide, your child's need for privacy is nowhere near as important as your role to protect them. Let me tell you. They'll, "Oh, but you like whatever." Wait. One day, my parents always said to me, "May you raise a teenager like your own self." And then I did. It was quite, and still am actually. So the important thing is that I'm not here to negotiate things with you. I'm here to tell you that this is how things work. There are certain rules, like I've secured the house, we secured the device. And the most important thing is, like, say, for example, you have kids coming over for a party. Do you leave the door of the room open? Is that a rule in your house? Must the door be open? Some people yes, some people no. And the devices are very much to say, I need a window into that thing. I don't want to sit and look through it because I know you're going to hide stuff. You're cleverer than me, etc., etc. I want to be able to open the door and say, I want to just peep in and see you're right. And if I see someone in there or smell cannabis coming out of your, that's another whole talk. Because the cannabis thing is driving me off my head. We've made cannabis CBD the cure from anything from a pimple on your toe to brain cancer. And I tell you, it is breaking children's brains daily at the moment, and nobody wants to listen. Anyway, sidetracked. So what we do want to say to our children is that I care enough about you to allow you to be angry with me, because I do. And if you want privacy, happy days. What I'll do is I'll give you a book, a pen, and a lock. And if you go happy days, you can have your private diary. I won't go into it. But if I think that there's cocaine in your room or somebody coming through the window to come and whatever, I'm going to turn the whole place down, because that's my job. Okay. And I'm here to do that job, and I will do that job. Okay. Despite your protests. I'm not going to be ugly about it or abusive about it or whatever. So I'm going to tell you this is how it is. So when I have to do it, I'm just reminding you I'm doing what I said I'm going to do. And then we must do it consistently. Okay, so that's the basics. So how do we do this? So the one, I got involved with the group. I've disclaimed I have no financial interest in this company, and this BARC program has been launched. It's been sort of, Nedbank seems to have backed it, and Discovery seems to have backed it. And the people I'm seeing use it, the parents I see who've got it on, it's working quite well. So for example, I've got a client at the moment. He is vaping, drinking, doing other things which are unmentionables, like that thing in Harry Potter, the thing that can't be named, and doing all kinds of funny things. So I said, you have got to put that on his phone. So what happens is it alerts the parents based on a set of parameters is the best word. So it would be things like drugs, violence, sex, and I think it's drugs, violence, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I think, yeah. So drugs, violence, explicit language. So what happens is it'll send it to you and say, this is what is being said. Now, that is not a thing to go, no, look what you're doing. The phone, you're allowed to use your phones to start a conversation, say, what's going on here? Because this is a window into their brain. Okay. And as there may be consequences for it, don't misunderstand me. I mean, there may be consequences for the messages and that, but it's not about foreclosing opportunities for talking, because you must remember children's behavior is how they communicate. And we need to learn to listen to their behavior, because they often don't have the words. You know, we talk about this brain, this neuroscience I was speaking about. We talk about this brain, and we say, you know, I ask your kids and I say to them, how many of you do stupid stuff? The whole crowd puts their hands up. And I say, but why do you do stupid stuff? Don't know, YOLO, FOMO. It was fun. You know, typical teenage responses. I mean, I said exactly the same thing when I was 14. You know, so we need to recognize that there is a level at which that brain is sped up and they can't control the impulses. So we must be a little bit kinder. Okay. So there's a level between permissiveness and punitive that is sort of the holy grail, and it's very difficult to find. But it's done largely through conversation. Okay. The other thing that is very important to think through is the fact that they are getting inputs and scripts in their brains that we need to counter. The biggest one, Paul. Do not for 1 second misunderstand how bad it is out there at the moment. You know, and if you say NIMBY, not in my backyard, you are sincerely deluded. Let me tell you why. Because access to a cell phone has made pornography inevitable, not accessible. Average age of exposure, 9 or 10. Okay. And the things I'm seeing, children going, oh, it's porn. No. The things I'm seeing, some of the stuff the young men come to me that they've looked at are the equivalent of crime scenes I've investigated over the last 30 years in sexual assault cases I've investigated. Okay. So you're doing a very complicated thing. You're mixing trauma with sexual arousal. And that's called traumatic sexualization. These boys present to me as if they have been sexually abused based on what they've been exposed to online. So if you cannot provide an alternative for that pornographic script, okay, it's the only script they have. Okay. Now, the difficulty for us in that script is the fact that we never got one. I mean, guys of my age, I mean, we were raised by the Nazis, you know, so we were. So you didn't, I mean, my school was run by card-carrying RVB members. So the word sex wasn't even mentioned in any context whatsoever. I mean, we lived under an Immorality Act. So we don't know how to talk to our children about sex because we don't have a script. Okay, but we better learn. Okay, because without one, we've got serious problems. And that's the one big warning today. I see children 11, 12, 13 from all of these high income schools, because those are the people who have access to endless phones and endless Wi-Fi. I don't see it so much in my Hillbrow children because they don't have access to fancy phones and endless Wi-Fi. But things like stickers. I mean, I've got a set of stickers from a group of 12-year-old girls who were sending them to another. It made a little bit of hair I've got fall out. I was like, how on earth did you find that sticker? What did you type into the search engine to get there? You have no idea. Okay. So you have to understand that this is not a game. This is not something where you've got someone like me standing, oh, like check him, he's like the end of the system because he's the 1%ers where everything goes wrong. Yes, I am. You don't want to come visit me there. And there, but for the grace of God, go all of us. Okay, because it's every. Okay, good. Right. And then finally, okay, before we sort of get to that last bit, is that I'm seeing the crisis of the disconnected connected. Now, what that means largely is that we've got connection, and I sort of made this up myself, connection with an X and connection with a C. Connection with an X is what we had in COVID in lockdown, and connection with the C is what we're doing here. Okay. Now, what is missing from connection with an X is some incredibly important human skills. and they are the following. Okay. So the biggest issue is that we are living in a world of mindfulness with the double L as opposed to a single L, because we are never present anymore. Never. I see people sitting with their children having dinner on their phones. I mean, I'm like, what on earth is more important on your phone than spending time talking to your child? I've got children saying to me, they say to their parents, Mom, I'm talking to you, get off your phone. That should never be. I mean, none of that should be. Okay, we are there to witness and enjoy our children, even though we want to strangle them on a good. Okay, so the big thing about it is that the concept of boredom, which is part of the mindfulness thing, has become like an affliction. So children say, but I'm bored. You know? So children come to me at the gym and they say to me, but I'm bored. I say, I know. And I'm very pleased. Because boredom does two very important things. The first, we know it assists with creativity and, you know, kind of painting and plays and writing and whatever. But what people don't recognize is there's a much more important function to the right hemisphere of the brain distributed for the left hemisphere, and that is emotional regulation. So how many of you suffer from insomnia? When you lie there it's generally between 2 and 3 in the morning. You lie there between 2 and 3 in the morning and you look at that ceiling. Your brain does not go to your beautiful island holiday that you once had. It goes straight to the darkness. Okay? Because there's a negativity bias in the brain that kept us alive as a species. Like if you were walking through the savannah and you didn't think there was a worry, you'd be eaten by lions very quickly. So you're constantly on guard that something's going to go wrong. So there's always that negativity bias. And we have to recognize that in children, the negativity bias is there and it's painful. So they don't want to sit with it and learn to regulate the complexity of those things we call emotions, which are chemical reactions in our body. So they want to be distracted from them. So when you take it away, they cannot regulate themselves. And then what do? We give it to them because they can't regulate themselves. And we create this endless loop of the inability to regulate. And by the time they become so dysregulated, it's called an addiction, then we've got a serious problem. Okay. So we need to have places where there is mindfulness. Now, this mindfulness thing has become quite curious to me, because if you ask me to practice mindfulness, my brain eats me like I'm being cannibalized by some ravenous kind of zombie beast, because the things in my head are just diabolical from the stuff I've seen over the years. I've got all kinds of traumas and vicarious traumas. For me to have my mind still is almost impossible. So I'll say to children, but there's other ways. For example, music is what feelings sound like. So don't just say to children, it's such cuck music and they're using all those bad words and whatever. Be curious about the kind of the tone of the music and the word. Fashion is children putting their insides on the outside and trying to find a way to get the world to listen to them. So, you know, we don't have to be fancy about being present. Okay? Being present is just being connected to something. Okay? It's the zone. You know, it's when everything lines up. Like, for example, when I'm listening to music and cooking, I'm in a zone. The whole world is just a wonderful, peaceful place. Okay. And everybody's got a different way to find that. And that's what I mean by mindfulness. It's not just being constantly distracted all the time on a phone. Mentalizing impulsivity is the biggest problem. This is where bullying comes from. Now, the word bullying is driving me wild, because everything from a boy who comes to me, also at a local school, I'm being bullied. Coach, I said, yes, what do they do? Now I was running with the ball down the wing and they bumped me off the ball. I said, that's soccer. That's what you do. Don't tell me that you've been bullied. That's soccer. He took the ball from you, dribble better, run faster, you know, learn more ball skills, do something. Two children, like, I don't have, you watch that very distressing streaming movie called Tundle, where that girl was bullied, and then went home and had a successful suicide. And then the girl who bullied her ended up being charged. She's being charged by the police for culpable homicide, but they didn't charge her at the time. It's a complete disaster where they let both sets of children down. Because the idea that that was bullying is complete nonsense. That was assault. And because they didn't name it what it was, they didn't give that child access to services as well. Now, we don't like these children. Okay. Educators, where are you? Is it, or you all here? Okay, right. Now, how many of you work with children you love? Like. I'm mildly agreeable on a good day. Do not like. What are you? Want to throttle. But we don't. Of course, sometimes. But we don't because we're professionals and we put the correct kind of boundaries in place. Okay. But there are children with what we call lucky and unlucky behaviors. Now, children who are cruel to other people have what we call unlucky behaviors. They're what we call the externalizing behaviors. If you want to have fancy names for them, they kind of cluster B things and whatever. But it's basically that lack of empathy for another person. Okay. And they're unlucky because we don't like them. Okay. And their behavior pushes them away from us. Whereas when someone is a victim, we want to hold them close and fix them and, console them. Or if a child's like anxious or depressed or panicky or whatever, we want to fix them. So what we do is we create a strange dialogue in our head when we say, yeah, that child who was bullied, that child's a difficult child, maybe that kind of, we start doing some victim blaming. Or we do another weird thing. That child that was bullied must have serious problems, and that child must have been bullied themselves, therefore they are bullied. We want to be so careful of those dialogues because that then goes into, for example, male sexual abuse literature where men who are abused become abusers. Now, the person who's been hurt by the bully suddenly has to feel sorry for the person who's hurting them because somewhere they're victims. So we have to make them into people we can feel sorry for because because bad things have happened to them, instead of holding them accountable for their behavior. So the externalizing unlucky behaviors are very difficult to work with. And as a result, what happens is we minimize things. Okay. So it's, they've been bullied. No, that child assaulted that child and we need to deal with this thing properly. Okay. Because we're offering both children services. But the one child is just more difficult to work with than the other because they affront us. No, go for it, please.
You don't do that. Not kindness of
100%.
because that child, you can never say that was completely unacceptable for whatever reason that you did it. And
Exactly.
if you do not name, even if it is a criminal offense, if you do not name it and recognize it, then parents won't even say. And down the line,
That's the problem.
the knock-on effects of that is just.
That's the problem. It's that hidden curriculum. What do we teach underneath what we teach? So I'm doing a big presentation, in fact, Wednesday in Cape Town. I'm at a trauma conference with what we're calling the Lost Boys. I mean, you'll all have seen the reports. The report at the bottom says, not a candidate for therapy. Like, okay, then what? Okay. Oh, you don't do nothing. They're just not a candidate for traditional therapy. Okay, so what do we do? Help me. And nobody knows. And this is the problem. Okay, so when these children bully, we need to see that behavior as the same as the behavior of the child who acts in the depressed, anxious, suicidal, who we rally around, whatever. But the externalizing behaviors really affront us. And that's all about projection. We're scared of them. I mean, these kids come to me and the one got on the chair. You're not my father, swearing at me. I'm leaving. I said, you're in the middle of Hillbrook. Where are you going, my boy? I said, you play Grand Theft Auto 11 on your machine. You go into the streets of Hillbrook, you're in actual Grand Theft Auto here in real life. And I say, I'm not scared of you. I'm really not scared of you. I can't afford to be scared of you. And everybody in this world, every child has a right to have someone who's crazy about them. And sometimes a bit crazy to work with them. Right. So that is this part here. So what we've lost in the online world is we have lost a very important human skill. And that is the ability to have a two-way thing where that is the human dance. So the human dance is, I can see there's a man to my left, he's taking copious notes on his cell phone. I see a couple at the back looking at me quizzically, and the naughty people always sit back left. Now they're upset that I said that, they're laughing, now they're embarrassed. The two in the middle are making eye contact with, looking at everybody else and hoping I'm not going to pick on them. Okay, back right is now thinking he's coming to me now. And then what happens is just by that dance, I engage you. Okay. And if I had have got up here and started talking like this, you would want, if I had come and been more aggressive, you're not looking after your children, your brain would switch off. So there's this line in the world where connection is about a dance of the body and the face and the voice. We have none of that online. Even when it's online, it's not interactive. So there's a thing called the still face experiment. All the psychologists will have seen it. It's Ainsworth. So there was Bowlby, which was attachment, and there was a person called Ainsworth who built onto that. And basically what happens is this mom, she's got the child in the feeding chair, and the child's got interacting with her, and she's, oh, could you go? The child's often whatever. And then the mother goes deadpan. She just switches off all of her emotions. Okay, no facial expressions, no interaction. Then about 40 seconds, that baby is hysterical, trying to get her attention, but hysterical, screaming hysterically to try and get her attention. That's what's happening when you put a child on a phone with a face. That face is not reading your child's face. Okay, it doesn't know what to react to. And the child interacts and that thing reacts in a way back to what the hell's going on here. So that is where prosody is. The prosody is tone of voice, but I'm talking about tone of voice, tone of face, tone of body. Mentalizing is the ability to take the perspective of another person. It's a theory of mind. Like I'm taking the perspective of that person who laid sideways on her chair now and sat up when I looked at her because she's getting uncomfortable because she's tired and like whatever. So in that perspective taking, I adjust myself to connect. Okay. Because I see your mind, it's being able to see your mind. Empathy is that being able, it's not walking another person's shoes, it's not possible, but it's trying to see what that person is trying to communicate, and it's mainly nonverbal. And then compassion is being kind. Now, you'll largely see that the great complaint of mostly girls' schools at the moment is an increase in unkindness among the girls. That's been an ongoing complaint every school I've been to. Okay, it's because they've lost that. And it's become about a very superficial, I have, I don't have, I'm in today, I'm out today, everybody's expendable. If I have this, I'm in, if I don't, I'm out. I'm the admin, I can cancel you. You know, the way to make good friends is to have good enemies, you know, they learned that from America apparently. And you've got this whole thing is us and them and whatever. And it's not the way the world is. We as humans, we prospered because we could cooperate. And these very competitive environments, especially post-COVID, do not facilitate cooperative being together. Everything is competitive because all of the things like good marks and good achievements and good drama, sport, whatever, all gives you access to privilege, which is why you're here. Okay, so it's inherently competitive, and the machine inherently doesn't care about your children's development because it's turned them into a product, and they are a product based on their production. So in other words, what they put online. Okay, and then it just feeds them back to themselves. Okay, so basically what we've ended up is with a very complex form of narcissism. Okay, so you've got narcissism. I don't know, do you know the story of Narcissus Echo? And does anyone know the Greek myth of Echo? Okay, so Echo wandered around, only able to hear the last part of what everybody could only hear the last part of what was said. So it was that echo at the end all the time. So everything's out of context. Okay, it's a very interesting story. And Echo loved Narcissus, and Narcissus was condemned to look in his reflection for the rest of eternity. Now, sort of what we're doing to young people today as well, because they're being condemned not only to look into their own. Oh, and by the way, do you know that girls' cameras have slightly different settings to boys' cameras? You know, boys' cameras, you switch on the selfie camera. But girls' selfie cameras should. And we laugh about it. You should understand pouting is overtly sexual.
Yeah.
And there's a sexualization based on pouting. Why are you pouting? That's an old evolutionary thing. So what's happening? They put themselves online. Someone looks at them, doesn't like them enough. They take themselves down. They put another version of themselves online. That one's like, they keep that version. Don't like, take that version off. Put that version. And there's this constant shifting identity where you can't develop what we call ego strength, the sense of where I depart from, what I stand for, and what I stand against. Okay, does that make sense? Last slide.
Okay.
So this is what I'm battling. Okay, I don't want to come in here and terrify you. I don't want to come and tell you horrific, grotesque stories about how terrible the world is and make you go home and fear the world even more, and teach your children to fear it. But what I want to land with you is a couple of very important misunderstandings that we want to correct in children and yourself, and to find a middle road. Children have to understand they are products of the machine. I mean, I say to children, how many of you have lied about where you live online? A whole lot of people. Me, I lied. Okay. I said I lived in America so that people can't find me. I said, oh yeah, how many of you lied about where you live while having your location on your cell phone? Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. How many of you went to a shopping center, came out and said, how did you enjoy your shopping center at Zara Center? You know, did you like your purchase? Because now got your card connected to your phone, connected to the, you know, or you go to a restaurant and says, did you enjoy your eating experience at such and such a place? Okay. Then you're talking around your phone says, you got it. Now Google does it to me all the time. Hello, Google. So what happens is that every time I say something about Google online, my phone says, I have to switch off airplane mode to help you with that thing. So it's listening to you. Okay. Talk around and it sends you adverts for things you're talking about. Okay. It knows what you look like. So my best is I get things on Facebook saying to me, by the way, Luke, is this you? Please tag yourself in this picture. I'm like, that's not me. That's some oak in Russia. And he looks dodgy. So what's happening in that context, okay, is a very important thing is your children are developing their brand. That's basically what you're doing. Okay, everything everybody knows about me that they read out today comes straight off the internet. No one's checked if I ever studied at Wits. No one's asked for my qualifications, my credentials. No one's asked for anything. They Google me online and say, geez, Luke's so cool. Okay, let's hire him. Equally, if I make cut, they won't hire me. Because in the first 3 lines of Google, I am who Google says I am. That is who I am in the world. Okay. And that's based on very complex algorithms, based on my social media profiles, my LinkedIn profiles. I know what they're doing because I see what they do. I see, like I've recently joined MyHeritage. My parents are beside it because I've done the DNA test about where my heritage comes from. Apparently there's some dodgy genes in my family. So I'm like, so now I put this in, I put my date of birth. Next thing, my whole family tree appears online. There's a picture of my mother and my father, my grandfather at my mother's wedding, my grandmother at, I'm like, where did this come from? I didn't do any of this. This is my parents, you know what I mean? It's a clever machine, okay? And it can be used very well because if you curate yourself online like an exhibition, you can do a great thing. So that, I didn't do that first introduction because I was introduced, but normally I do that introduction because that's my social media profile. If you look me up, that's all you'll find of me. And occasionally what you'll find is stuff about me being a grandfather, my wife and my anniversary. You'll see me driving BMWs and hot rods and motorbikes because I'm a bit of a petrol head, but I put that in my bio as well. And I curate my content because I am a product. Okay. And if we get children to understand that, we're not telling them don't be online. We're telling them to be intentional online. And the biggest terror I have is that this was told to me by one of my clients who was suicidal, where I had to, and I couldn't find him a bed, and it was an absolute nightmare under lockdown. Tried to jump off a balcony, and it was a terrible story. He said to me, you know what, coach, we have become the generation of happy pictures and sad lives. Life is everything that's happening in between what we post. In between, it's just sad. And you remember John Irving, the novelist? He wrote The World According to Garp. Do any of you remember what T.S. Garp stands for? His father was a technical sergeant. I won't explain how his mother got pregnant because she was a nurse and father was in a coma. It was a complicated story that only John Irving can tell. It's one of my favorite authors. So he said, yes, but then my dad was a technical sergeant. I then went from being terribly shy, not knowing where to, then I went to being terribly sexy, which is a lot of what young people are putting online. It's all that good thing. Then I just went to being terribly sad. And what we've got to be careful of is we've got to be careful that the machine does not determine our children's identities. It is exactly like mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. Behind that is that witch with the apple. Thank you. Exactly 1 hour. Stop. Reset.
Thank you so much,
It's a
Luke,
pleasure.
for giving us that first part of the evening. Before we continue, I'd like to thank also what we forgot to mention was that Ivanka, our executive head, is also joining us online. And she's joining us tonight to hear this information as well. But I've also been taking notes, but you didn't point me out. That's okay.
I tried not to.
So what I really loved about the conversation or the talk that Luke has just given us is that he's told us that our children, which we've seen as well in our schools, are living in a dream world. They're living in a series because that's the places that they're getting their cues about how to be social, who to be friends with, what to do. And in order for us to have this change in the behavior that we're seeing in our girls, in our boys, because we are joined by other parents, the key part is in us being consistent, remembering that the phones that we give our kids are tools that we give to them on a contract and not this is a gift and you can do whatever you want, because that's when the danger comes in. That's where the danger is. And that we also want to make sure that we are being the parents for our kids, because if we're not, then someone else is going to do that for us. But the main part in that is to care about our kids enough that, and I wrote this down, sorry, care enough about your kid for them, even if they do get angry at you, it's okay. They'll get over it. There've been many times when I grew up and was angry at my mom for taking my phone, but she cared enough for me because she could see what was happening. And I think that saved me and will probably save a lot of our kids, especially with everything that they are being exposed to. So a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to be serving the refreshments in the ARA. We'll start promptly again at 7 o'clock for our second part, where Luke will be speaking about the risk-taking behavior. For our online guests, please do stay online. We will be muting the chat so that we can give our online parents as well a chance to take a break, take some refreshments before we start again at 7 o'clock. But yes, I think that's all for now. Don't want to take up too much of your break time, and we'll see you back at 7 o'clock.